With the help of Hashem, we are learning Brachas Daf Chav Dalid. We left off speaking about the challenge between, on one hand, we want to give the greatest respect for tefillin, and on the other hand, we are responsible to protect tefillin. So the sugya began on Daf Chav Gimel. Initially, obviously, you may not take tefillin with you into a bathroom. You have to give tefillin respect. But then there was an issue of protection, and as this evolved, we are allowed, in certain circumstances, when there's no place else to leave the tefillin safely, either rodents can take it or people can steal it, then you could take it into the bathroom. So in continuation of that, we learned the sheet of Shmuel that one is allowed to store one's tefillin mamish in one's bed, as we explained, above the mattress, under the pillow, not directly under the head, but all of that was to afford the tefillin greater protection, even though there's a certain amount of disrespect. And furthermore, we learned that Shmuel paskins that when the tefillin are in one's bed, one is even allowed to be with one's wife. Now there are other dinim that the Gemara here is not speaking about explicitly. We did mention it yesterday. There is the concept of having something holy stored kiss, betoich kiss, so to say, in a double wrapper, and this obviously would also mean that according to Shmuel, a side of the tefillin bag, right? And then the question is whether the tefillin bag is considered at least one wrapper. We learned in the Gemara concept of it being hollow, the tefach inside. And then there is the pillowcase itself, or the pillow itself is considered the other wrapper. But anyway, Shmuel holds that one may leave the tefillin with him in the bed. We're going to start learning of other such practices by Amoraim that also kept the tefillin close to them because it afforded the tefillin greater protection, even though you can argue it gave the tefillin a bit less respect, but protection trumps respect. We're going to move on to learn what will be the din regarding reciting the Shema. And we're going to learn various dinim that a person may not recite the Shema if they are touching an erva, and what's going to happen if a person is with another person in the same bed. In those days, first of all, people slept uncovered, unclothed. They had a cover, but they were under the cover, they were naked, and the beds were obviously very small. So if a person is touching an erva, you may not recite the Shema. We're going to start learning about different body parts, whether they are considered an erva, whether they are not considered an erva, a possible difference between one's own wife, ishtoi keguf yadami, versus another person. We're also going to be learning about the concept, about the din, that one may not recite a bracha when one's erva is exposed. We're going to learn about a woman that's going to separate challah even when she's unclothed. We're going to learn that one may not say the Shema when you can see your erva, and many details to that. Brachas Chavdalad has in it the famous 4 ervas, that tefach be'isha erva, as we'll explain, that shoik be'isha erva, as we'll explain, machlokes what shoik means, koil be'isha erva, and seyar be'isha erva. Wow, all of this is on Daf Chav Daled. We're going to then move on to learning about Vaiter Dinim of respecting the tefillin, whether one may suspend the tefillin, whether it is suspending it by the straps, which is the most disrespectful, whether it is suspending the tefillin by the boxes, whether it is suspending the tefillin in the bag, you're suspending the bag, which is the least disrespectful. Even in the words of intro, it's very important when people put on their head tefillin that even for a moment don't hold on only to the straps of the head tefillin, and thus for a moment having the box itself hanging, that's very disrespectful. You have to figure out how to always hold the box in your hand, even when you have to manipulate the straps to get them around your head. And from there we're going to move on to Vaiter Dinim of respect during Shemona Esrei. And we're going to have a testimony regarding how what Rebbe did, both regarding stretching during Shemona Esrei, yawning, sneezing, if need be, spitting. What happens if a person has to pass wind during the Shemona Esrei? And then we're going to move back to the Shema. Is a person allowed to recite the Shema if they are walking through a filthy place? And we're going to have a machlokes. Some will be of the opinion that if you're walking through a place that's dirty, you're not stopping there, then you can cover your mouth, put your hand over the mouth, and that suffices. We're going to learn the final din today in today's daf, the difference between Shema and Shemona Esrei, another nafkamina between Shema and Shemona Esrei, that when it comes to the reciting of the Shema, even if one's chest is uncovered, one could recite the Shema. the lave cannot see the erva. We'll speak about the gartel. We'll explain all this in the daf. But if there's something in between the heart and the erva, even though one's chest is exposed, you can say the Shema, but not by Shemana Esrei. By Shemana Esrei, you have to have one's chest covered as well. And let us start where we left off. We left off on Daf Chav Daled, Amud Aleph. We left off 5 lines from the top of the Amud. Right, we clarified again. We not only did we, even though there was a brisa that, so to say, the brisa seemingly said against Shmuel, Rava Paskins like Shmuel, that you could have the tefillin in your bed, even when ishtoi imoi, meaning even when a man might have a relation with his wife, as long as it is under the pillow, as long as you're not directly leaning your head on top of the tefillin. And let's learn about other Amoraim which had the same concept, that they preferred having the tefillin closer to them for the tefillin's protection, even though it meant there was a little bit more of a disrespect, especially if it's a married person and he's going to be with his wife. Says the Gemara, 5 lines from the top of the Amid, Bar Kaparam, Tsoyir Luhu Bechilta, that he would wrap his tefillin, he would store his tefillin in some sort of curtain that surrounded his bed. But again, he would have the bulge of the tefillin facing outwards. So again, it was in the bed vicinity, but again, lekavet hatefillin, the bulge itself was outside, not directly above the bed. So if anyone were to take it, they wouldn't do it because it's in his bed, but at least it was a little bit more distant from him. Rav Shisha, Bereid Ravidi, Manach Lohu, Ashar Shifa, he would put the tefillin on a stool, and which was a bet stool, Upada Sudara Ilovayo, and he would cover it with a scarf, like we mentioned in the words of the intro, and the Rishonim speak about the concept of kis betoich kis. So even if we're going to count the, let's say, the talis bag, for sure you can count the talis bag, which is made not only for the tefillin, it's made for the talis and the tefillin. So therefore, it's not the wrapper for the tefillin. So it's not bottled to the tefillin. So that's considered one covering. And then you have the sudara, that's considered the second covering. And kis b'toich kis is permitted. Then there's no issue of tznius, of not being allowed to have a relation with the holy articles in the room. Says the Gemara weiter, Amar Rav Hamnuna b'reid Rabbi Yosef. Ziv Nachada, one time, I was standing in front of Rava. Amar Li, and Rava tells me, Zil isolate tefillin, please bring me my tefillin. And where exactly was Rava's tefillin? Says the Gemara, Ashkachtinu, and I found this tefillin being caught between the mattress, it was above the mattress, Likesses, and the pillow. And as we learned above, on top of the Amid, Takeshulay Keneged Roshei, not mamish, in the middle of the pillow, to the side of the pillow. And it happened to be Vahava Yodanon, I knew, says Rav Hamnuna Diyom Tefilla Have, that Rava's wife went to the mikvah the night prior. In other words, I knew that they had a relation. Now, parenthetically, how did he know? Well, the Rishonim here, Rashi doesn't say anything, but there's a Ramah speaking about the chashivos of minhagim, and there's a detailed story about this, but to share just one part of the story, that in the city of Krakow, the minig was that the husband of the mikvah lady would hear from his wife all of the women that went to the mikvah, and in the next morning he would take that list and he would walk over to the men in the shul and he would wish them mazel tov. And so to speak more about that, so that Ramah initially wasn't planning to write the minhagim in the Ramah, on his comments on the Shulchan Aruch. And not only that, the Ramah didn't like that minig. He didn't know the reason for the minig, and one of the first things he did as the Rav in the city is he abolished that minig. Now what happened is that he discovered the importance of that minig. That, don't forget, there in Europe during the winter, there wasn't the mikvahs that we had today. It was mamish mesiras nefesh, to break the ice, to go to whatever lake, whatever body of water they had outdoors, and it was a big nisayon. And by the husbands getting a mazel tov from the balanit's husband, that they were together with their wives, that means that if the husband would not get a mazel tov, that means that his wife didn't go to the mikvah. And there was indeed such a case that once he took away the minig of saying mazel tov, he found it not to be modest. Why should the husband of the mikvah lady even know who went to the mikvah the night prior? So there was a woman that once didn't go to the mikvah. And that Ramah realized the chashivos of Minhagi Yisrael, that not only did he not abolish minhagim, even if the reason was not known, he wrote minhagim in his Sefer Ramah, written on the Shulchan Aruch. So it could be that was the minig, that Rav Hamnuna was his wife was the mikveh lady, so he knew which woman went to the mikveh, and therefore which couple was together. Be that as it may, he knew that Rava was his wife, and he realized the reason why Rava asked him to go get him his tefillin, ula ag muran, in order to let him know, to teach him that halacha l'maisa hu da'avat. In other words, even though we learned already on Daf Chav Gimel Amid Beis that the last line in the Amid that the Rava says halacha is like him, but let's not forget that we just learned above by Daf Chav Beis that sometimes you're mekel l'achedim, but you're machmer for yourself. Rava wanted him to know that halacha l'maisa, you leave the tefillin in your bed if this is the safest place, even though ishtay imay. Okay, and now we're moving on to this concept, as we mentioned in our intro, that one may not be touching an erva and saying the Shema. Likewise, one may not be touching someone else's erva and at that time say the Shema. So the erva means one's genitals, and here the question will be whether the buttocks, and we're going to use from now on the words in the Gemara, the agavos, whether the agavos are halachically considered an erva. So boyi minei Rabbi Yosef bereid Rab Nechunya from Rabbi Yehuda. Shnayim sheyeshenu b'mita achas. Two people are sleeping in a bed. Common that people slept unclothed, so they were naked, they were under the covers. And the beds were small. That means that one person's body was touching the other. Now obviously, get out of bed and liyayid and wash negelvaser and go to the mikveh and say brachas. In the case where it's the end of Zman Krishma, you woke up late, you gotta say it now. So can you say the Shema even though that you are back to back? In other words, each one's backside is touching the other one's backside. The question is, again, whether buttocks are considered an erva or not. Amalei, Hachi Amar Shmuel, Afiloi Ishtay Imai. Afiloi Ishtay Imai means not only are you allowed to say it with another person, even with your wife, it's never considered a erva. Maskiv la Rabbi Yosef. Rabbi Yosef challenges Shmuel. He agrees in part, but he challenges the other part. That ishtoi v'loy meboya acher. When you said afilu ishtoi, you're saying that if it's two people in the bed, if they're back to back, they may recite the Shema, and even with one's wife. So he says no. Meila, I agree with you. If it's a man and his wife, because of the concept of ishtoi kegufai, so a person is familiar with his wife, he will be able to concentrate when he's saying the Shema. Meila, I agree with you. But another person lafka gufay, and therefore he disagrees, and he holds, Rabbi Yosef holds, that it's usher to say the Shema if one's person's agavos is touching someone else's agavos. Meisvei frekti gemara. It says in a brayso, the first white line, Shnaim she'yishenu b'mita achas. If two people are sleeping in one bed, ze machzer panav v'koyde. One person, indeed, that's an option. Turn to the other way. You can't face the erva, nor can you be touching someone else's erva, someone else's genitals. But turning back to back is okay. The ze machzer panav v'koyde. That's brayso number one. However, v'tanya achrita, we learned in brayso number two. Hayoshen b'mita. If a person is sleeping in a bed, banav, ubnei beisay b'tzida, and his sons and other household members. Now, normally, other household members refers to the wife. We'll get to that in a moment. Are on his side, hareze lo yikra krishma. He may not read kriya shema. Elim kain hoisa talis mafsekas b'neim. Only if he uses a talis, he uses his cloak to physically separate between his body and the other person's body. However, even this brayso says that if the children are minors, we'll define minors in a moment, then mutter. So now the Gemara formulates the question against Shmuel, who is very lenient. Why do you not have a stira between these two braysos? Because the first brayso that says you may say it, that's be'ishtay. And even Rabbi Yosef is moide because of the concept of ishtay kegufay. The kavana that you need to have won't be disturbed when a person is in that position, touching his wife. Haba acher, but if haba acher is usher. Ela l'shmuel, that always allows it, is kasha. So Amar loch Shmuel l'Rabbi Yosef. To me there's a kasha. To you there's also a kasha. Minicha l'Rabbi Yosef. To Rabbi Yosef is it okay? V'hatanya hoya yoshen b'mito ubanov ubnei beisai. B'mito lo yikra krishma elam kein hoisa talisim afsekas b'neim. And Ubnei Beisoi says Shmuel means your wife. So you got to steer in Braises. So you have to say it's a machlokes tanoim. Ela ma'isloch l'meimer ishtal Rabbi Yosef tanoihi b'meila. So l'didinami tanoihi, and one Tana will agree that no matter who is in the bed with you, as long as it is back to back, even though there's a physical touching, we are allowed to recite the Shema. Omar Mar continues the Gemara by the two dots. The master taught above, Zeh machzor panav v'koyre krishma. Ai v'ho'ika agavois, but aren't the baraks erva is the charayim misayeh leil rafuna do amar rafuna agavois ein bahem mishum erva. Now, lema misayeh leil rafuna. Perhaps we'll bring a raya to Rafuna from the following Mishnah and Chala. Mamish in the left field. Ha'isha yesheves, a woman can sit down. She's uncovered. She's naked, and v'koitza la chalasa, and she can separate chala even though aruma. Now the issue is not that much about the separating of the chala, but the issue is before you separate chala, you got to make a bracha. One may not recite a bracha while one is naked. Nevertheless, the Mishnah is saying that a woman may do so. Why, says the Mishnah? Because she's able to cover her genitals when she sits. It's so to say, it's covered by the ground itself. Now, a man's private parts would protrude, but a woman can sit down and say the bracha. So that's a raya. What part of the woman taka can be covered when she sits down? Her erva. However, if agavos are also considered an erva, the entire agavos cannot be covered. Is the chanaya to Rafuna that agavos is not an erva? That which is halachically an erva by a woman is covered when she sits down. So the Gemara says you don't have a raya. It's not a kasha, it's not a raya. Why? Tirgama, Rav Nachman, by Yitzchak, you could explain, you could interpret that kegoin shahoyu panel toichais or tuchais bakarka, that her face, the bottom part of her body, is completely flush in the ground. She's sitting on the soft earth. And then if the earth is soft, then it can cover more, and her agavis can be covered, and maybe only then may she recite a bracha. So a raya from Chala you do not have. Amar Mar, we learned above, the master taught us that im hayubanav b'rei beisoy ketanim, then mutar. Even the second brayse, that's more machmer. Now asks the Gemara, what's the age for this din va'at kama machlokes? Amar Rav Chizda, tinoikes b'shalosh shanim v'yom echad, v'tinoik ben tesh shanim v'yom echad. As we had a Masechtas Nida, the same age which halacha determines is the age from when biyasan biyah, that's the age regarding whether their erva is considered a halachic erva. However, ikada amri, another version of what Rav Chizda said is no. It has to do with the body physically going into puberty. Tinoik is bas yud aleph shana v'yom echad, a girl from 11. Now, v'yom echad means she entered the 12th year. Taka, a full year before a bas mitzvah, but in many cases that's when puberty begins. V'tinoik ben shtei mesrei, and a boy, same. When he enters his 13th year, he's 12 years in one day. V'yom echad, and the Gemara clarifies v'idi, both the boy and the girl. Ad kedei, only if. No, it's only if shadayim nochaynu, when the breasts begin to develop, and the pubic hairs begin to grow forth, and if there's no puberty, then you're still considered a cotton until bottom bas mitzvah. From bottom bas mitzvah, even if this person is developing later, then it's ushered to, according to this braisa, to be touching flesh to flesh and saying the Shema. Amar Rav Kahana l'Ravashi, that Hassan Amar Rava in the first sugya, right, like we just quoted the last line on Daf Chav Gimel Amud Beis, where Shmuel had a lenient opinion, and he says that you can put your tefillin in your bed. You told me that even though tiyufta the Shmuel, even though there was a baraisa that explicitly wrote against the Shmuel, nevertheless, Hilchas HaKavos the Shmuel over here asks Rav Kahana to Ravashi, will Rava, or will you be lenient like Shmuel more than Rabbi Yosef, that no matter with whom, back to back, you can recite the Shema? Amar lei, to which Ravashi responds, Ata kulu b'chada machta machtinu. Were all of these halachas woven together in the same weave? In other words, just because we paskin like Shmuel in one case, why are you thinking that we should paskin like Shmuel in this case? Elahecha de itmar. Taka, we follow the din of Rava. When Rava said halachas like Shmuel, so is. And taka halacha l'maisa, but hecha de lo yitmer, and he's not siding here at all with the din with the leniency of Shmuel. Weiter. Amar of money lit of papa. Seyor yoytze bevigdoi. If there's pubic hair protruding from a garment, there is a hole in the garment, and none of the erva itself is visible, but a hair is going out. Mahu, are you allowed to read the Shema? And as we spoke out again in our intro, aside of the topic we just had of you can't say the Shema when you're touching an erva, there's another din. You may not recite the Shema when you are seeing an erva, your own erva, someone else's erva. So is that a problem? So Kari Alei, he responded, Papa responded, Seir, Stama here. In other words, the hair itself is not considered an erva. And now we're going to learn the 4 big dinim of what is an erva. Benegea, in our context, and in other contexts. In our context is, may I recite the Shema if I see that? Amar Rab Yitzchak, tefach be'isha erva. Excuse me. A tefach of skin exposed by a woman is an erva. Says Gemara, Lamai, hold on. Is it benegea that when is one not allowed to gaze, to look, to have hana at a woman only if he sees a tefach? No, v'hamar absheshes. Lama mana hakosav tachshitin shebachutz im tachshitin shebefnim. In the parsha of Matos, after we went to war and we won the war against the Midianites, and all of that was an akama because of how they made us sin immorally with their daughters. And the Torah tells us how much of the spoils we gave to the Kahanim and we gave to the Beis HaMikdash. And the Torah enumerates different types of tachshitin, of jewelry. Now the Torah speaks about a kumas. A kumas is a certain type of jewelry that women put on their private parts. That for sure makes sense, that was donated to Hashem because we wanted to get a kapara for the sins that were connected to immoral behavior that we had with the Benois Midian. But why does the Torah also have to speak the specific types of the other pieces of jewelry, the ugol, the earrings, and the anklets, and the bracelets? Why were they spoken out? Or even better, why were they even donated? There was no sin. They're not connected to a sin for which we're doing tshuva. And on that, lemer to tell you, no, lemer loch, kolam estakel be'etzbe ketana shel isha, that if a person gazes even at only a finger of a woman, ke'ilu mistakel b'makam ha'toirev, it's as if he looked at her place of nakedness. So Taka, since they were sitting with the daughters of Midian, and just looking at any part of them, so they looked at the ears, they looked at the hands, so that's why they gave the earrings and they gave the bracelets. So coming back, what does Rabbi Yitzchak mean when he says, Tefach be'isha erva, if it's the isur of to be mistakel, any amount is usur. Ella be'ishtayu lekrishma. In other words, if a man is with his wife, she's in the same room, and a tefach of skin that is normally covered is now uncovered, there he's not allowed to recite the Shema. Next thing, Rabbi Yitzchak, shoik be'isha, shoik, big machlekes, all the way into a poskim, whether shoik refers to the thigh, in other words, to the upper part of the leg, or whether shoik refers to the part of the leg from the knee until the ankle, the lower part of the leg. Shoik be'isha erva. Now, shenemar, as it says, quoting a pasuk, gali shoik, expose your shoik, and ivri naharis to go through the river. This pasuk doesn't prove either way. You know, when you walk through a river, you can pick up your dress, your jalaba, your pants, your skirt a little bit, or if the water is higher, you have to pick it up even higher. And it says right afterwards in the next pasuk, regarding one who needed to pick up to reveal their shoik to cross a river, tigal ervasech, your nakedness became revealed. In other words, ervasech is referring to the shoik, and vegam seirach erpasech, and your embarrassment was seen. Now understand the following: when it comes to dinei tznius, and this is negeh to dinei tznius, whenever the halacha says that a certain part is called an erva, no matter what the minig of the place is, then that always has to be covered. However, when something is not in halacha, but still people are nohig to cover beyond that, then you have to follow the minig hamakim. So that's the whole question. If shoik refers to the upper thigh, that for sure, then that's always considered the part that has to be covered. If the shoik is considered from the knee until the ankle, which is how most of Truma people behave, then that is a part of a woman that also has to be covered, no matter what the minik hamakim is. Weiter, Amar Shmuel, next din, koil be'isha. Koil be'isha says that itva, and says that ashba, and other rishonim, we're speaking about koil zemer. The singing voice of a woman is an erva. Shenemar, as it says, ki koilech orev, that your voice is sweet, umarech nove, and you have a beautiful appearance. In other words, this is something connected to, that can bring a person to arousal, and therefore one may not hear the voice of a woman singing. And the final, Amar Absheshes, seyar be'isha erva. The hair of the head of the woman is considered an erva, as it says that siyarech or sarech, that your hair is ke'eder ha'izim, it's like a flock of goats, and the pasuk there continues, that's coming down, shegolshu, from the Mount of Gilad. So since the Torah speaks about beauty regarding the woman's hair, so therefore seyar be'isha is a erva. Weiter. Amar Rabbi Chanina, Ani ro'isi es Rebbe, I saw, he's testifying that he saw Rebbe shatola tefillah, that he once suspended, or he regularly suspended his tefillin from a peg. He suspended his tefillin, and again, l'choira, the image that you have is that you suspended the tefillin from the straps, and the Gemara says that can be. Meisvei, we learned in a braisa, hatoila tefillah, if a person suspends his tefillin, yitolu loy chayev, may his life be suspended. Oy gewalt. And dorshe chamuras amru. Dorshe chamuras is the way the Gemara says, those who interpret the hidden meaning of psukim. They taiched, and we are quoting now a pasuk in Parshas Kisavai, Dani's bar mitzvah parsha, amru v'hoyu chalecha tuluyim locha min neged, that your life will be suspended in front of you. Why? So they taiched. Why does that happen? Zehatoila tefillah. That's for a person who's disrespectful to the tefillin by having it suspended. Now, why dafka tefillin and life? So Rashi, 4 lines before the bottom of the Amid, according to the emendation of the Bach, the beginning of the line, by us it's written, Shahatoira chayiv shaladam. The Bach says, Shetfilov, that tefillin is the life of a person. Oh, so if you're not allowed to do that, at kedei kach, that your life is suspended, how can you come and testify that Rebbe did it? So the Gemara answers like Hash. If you're suspending it by its straps, then it's always asur. What did Rabbeinu HaKadosh do? B'ketzitza. It means the box was affixed on something, and even though the ritzuos were suspended, that was okay. Like we mentioned in the intro, be very careful when you put on your head tefillin, and when you take off your head tefillin, figure out how to hold the tefillin in a way that you should never be only holding the straps, always, because at that moment, then the ktsitza is hanging, and that's not good. Even if you're having it suspended by the box itself, that's also prohibited. Hold on to the box. Hold on to the straps. Don't have one suspended off the other. When he had the tefillin in the tefillin bag, and the talis and tefillin bag, that bag he allowed to be suspended by a rope. But the tefillin never. If you're only speaking about, he testified that he suspended the bag, what's the chiddush? Answers the Gemara, sure there's a chiddush. The Tema would think that a sefer Torah may never be suspended even by its cover. And maybe tefillin is like a sefer Torah. So Kamash Mulan, that for this din it's not. For the dinim that we learned yesterday, we learned all about Tashmishay Kedusha. Just to know, Tashmishay Kedusha has a much greater level of holiness than Tashmishay Mitzvah. Tashmishay Kedusha is anything that is connected to the writings of Tanach, versus things that are used to do a mitzvah. A shofar is Tashmishay Mitzvah, tzitzis is Tashmishay Mitzvah. And Pasha Halacha Lamai said, no, they don't have to be nignaz, even though you can be noyeg derech bizayin, but they don't have to go into geniza. But when it comes to tashmishay kedusha, imagine tashmishay kedusha doesn't only mean the straps of the tefillin; it can even mean the bag that was designated exclusively for the tefillin. At kedei kach, the kedusha of tashmishay. So you would think that oibazoi tefillin should be like a sefer Torah. Or Tashmisha Kedusha is like a Sefer Torah. Stam, Tefillin and Mezuzahs, they're called Kadosh, and anything that's in service of it is called Tashmisha Kedusha. So here's the Chiddush that no, that talk about a Sefer Torah, even the mantle of a Sefer Torah has so much Kedusha that you may never, so to say, carry the Sefer Torah by somehow only holding physically onto the cover and the Sefer Torah comes along with it. That is considered Derech Bizayin. But for Tefillin, you could suspend the Tefillin bag. Weiter. For Amar Rabbi Chanina, Going back to more testimony regarding Rabbeinu HaKadosh. And now we're moving to davening, to Shemona Esrei. That Aniru Isias Rebbe, I witnessed Rebbe, Shegihek, that he stretched. You know, when you give a yawn, sometimes you stretch. Upihek, and he yawned. Venis Atesh, and he sneezed. Verok, and sometimes he spit. Turning to Daf Chavdalid, Amid Beis. Umemashmesh bebigdoy, and he handled this garment, says Rashi, that if there was a louse or a bug that was biting him during the Shemona Esrei, taking away his kavanah, he would kill the louse, not by touching it directly, but by using his garment to move away, to kill, or just to brush off the louse. All of this was done even though he was davening Shemona Esrei. Aval loy haya misatev. But if his talis fell off, and somebody Shoinim Rabbeinu Yonah says dafke, if it completely fell off, since he's standing Shemona Esrei, he did not bend down to pick it up. That's disrespectful. He left it on the ground. Now the Rabbeinu Yonah says, if you're middle of Shemona Esrei, if your talis is not off, but basically the sides roll out and you want to make it neat, that's okay. If it's distracting you. Making it neat is helping you stay focused on your davening. But if it completely falls off, Rabbeinu HaKadosh would leave it on the ground. Furthermore, this is all part of the testimony of Rabbi Chanina, that that when Rebbe yawned, he would put his hand over his chin. That means he would cover his mouth. The Rosh says, same thing with sneezing. To have one's mouth completely opened is not respectful. Okay. Frek the Gemara Meisvei. How can you testify that the Rebbe did something that goes against the din? It says in a Braisa. Gewaldige dinim. Hamashmiya koila b'tfilosei. A person who makes his voice heard. Shemona Esrei, we're supposed to say dafke b'koil namuch. This person is davening a little bit louder. So sehareze mekatnei amana. This person has little faith. Like Rashi says in the fourth line, the final line on top of the Gemara, Ki ilu ein HaKadosh Baruch Hu shomea tfilas lachash. Looks like he holds that if you don't speak a little bit louder, Hashem, so to say, can't hear. Katnei amana. Furthermore, what happens if you don't only make your voice heard, but you say it loud? Hamagbiya koila, you raise your voice b'tfilosi, that's already worse. Harezem in the via hasheker, you look like the false prophets that they used to shout b'koil godel whenever they would quote falsely something that Hashem said. The rule is you have to shout when the content is not that great. Weiter says the Braisa, megaik, if a person is going to stretch, or umefaik, if a person yawns during the Shemona Esrei, harezem megasi aruach, it's called acting accordingly. You're acting with gaiva. You're standing in front of God. Furthermore, says the Braisa, ha-misatesh. Now, normally, misatesh means sneezing. We'll see soon this misatesh is another lashon nikiyah of speaking about a person who not only passes wind, but he passes wind in a noisy way. That's going to be the ultimate meaning. Then simen raloi. That's already a bad sign. Another way of wording it is nikar. You see from this, shehu mechor, that this is a lowly person. Because just like physically, it sounds disgusting, it smells disgusting, that's a siman that's what the person is. Harak b'tfilasoi, if a person spits during davening, is ki'ilu rak b'fnei hamelech, he's mamash spitting in front of God, at kan lashon habraisa. Now the kasha is, hold on. Now, many things the Braisa said may not be done, Rebbe did, but not all of it poses the question. Bishleima megahek umefayik, stretching and yawning, I can explain. Leikash, when Rebbe did it was la'ansai. Sometimes you need to stretch. You're not making a voluntary movement. You need to yawn. Kan, when the Braisa says it's asur, right? It's gasei aruach. That's liritzoini. That's if you choose to do it. That's already considered very haughty. But ela misatesh, sneezing is akasha. So the Gemara answers, we already spoke it out. Misatesh nami likasha. Kan, when is it okay? Milamaila, when you're sneezing. In the middle of the Shemona Esrei, it's okay. Kan milamata, here it is. Again, you're passing wind in a noisy way. That's mamash muchur. To Amar Rabbizajac, says Rabbizajac, ho milsa, the following. Ivlali, gavaldik lashon, was swallowed by me. In other words, I absorbed this, I heard this, I took it in deeply. From the yeshiva of Rav Hamnuna. And what should I absorbed it? But utekiloli ki kula talmidoi, this is equal in importance to everything that I learned. We'll explain this. We'll give a ulay yeshleimer al pi chassidus why the following is mamish equal important to all the history. That hamis ateish b'tfilasei, that if a person sneezes during davening, simen yafaloi, it's a good sign for him. Because just like a sneeze, it brings about a certain amount of relief. Sneeze might even be healthy. So just like there's a relief or there's a health that's happening physically, the same is that they're going to give him a relief and they're going to give him a healing by answering his tefillas in a way that it's going to be b'toiv hanir of anigla. Oh, so hold on. Why is this so beautiful? So it's another. It's a good siman. But why is this utekila liki kula talmidoi? So it's a different words. There's a concept we learn a lot in chassidus called oir yashar versus oir chayzer. Oir yashar also is called shenishtal shuluminei. That everything that happens down here first happens in the higher worlds, and then from there it's nishtalshul and it happens over here. First milmaila and then milmata. Look at the lashon that he heard. He heard that kishem she'oisem le'nachas ruach milamata, that something is initiated down here, something physical. Not only our avoida, here it's he sneezed. In other words, when a person is gifted a bracha, is the pshat that first there was additional light that was given to him beruchnius, and then it trickled its way down begashmi. That's the normal say, that is what he knew about. But here he heard a whole new thing, a concept called oir chayzer. Oir chayzer, the way we learn in Chassidus, is that it bounces back. The oir, so to say, begins dafka milmata l'mayla. In other words, there's a concept that first the bracha manifests b'olam hazeh agashmi, and then from here it goes up. That's a big chiddush. That's a novelty. That's the opposite of the normal seder, and that's why maybe he said that this was so good that I heard it, I took it in, and this is so important to me. But the bottom line is, we explained everything other than spitting. How did he testify that the Rebbe used to spit? Sometimes when he davened, something mucus came into his mouth. But if you're not allowed to spit, then you're not allowed to spit. Ela rak arak kasha answers the gemara rak arak nameli kasha. That why? Let's explain that efshed kid Rav Yehuda. That perhaps like Rav Yehuda explained will be what the Rebbe did. The Amar Rav Yehuda hoya oimed batfila. V'nizdamen loyroik. There's spittle in his mouth. You're not mechuyev to swallow it. It's disgusting. But on the other hand, you're not allowed to spit it out. So mavliya betalisa, you should discreetly spit it into your garment, in your kerchief. That older generation, they had these kerchiefs and all of the roik went in there, then it went back into the pocket. Or we'll learn in a moment that they used to have turbans, and some of the peoples had a piece of material hanging from the side of the turbans. Put it in there, that's okay. Furthermore, ve'im talis nohu, and if the talis, if your garment is expensive, so that's the talis, it means your garment. Then mavliya ba'af rak susay, put it in your kerchief, put it in your turban. And when the Braisa says it's usher, that's to spit it on the ground. Ravina have koi achoyre de Ravashi. Ravina was once behind Ravashi, and his damen loy roik, and he sees that Ravashi middle of the Shemana Esrei, some spittle came into his mouth, and paske la'achoyre, and he threw it behind him. Which he didn't have it absorbed. He didn't put it in his kerchief. He didn't put it in his turban. He didn't spit in front of him. But the question is, that okay, you can't spit it on the ground, but mavliya ba'afrak susay, that you have to put it inside your kerchief, inside your turban. Amalei Ravashi responded, I have delicate sensibilities. No, I can't do that either. Elama, to show kavod la Hashem, I spit it and I threw it behind me. Quoting the Braisa above, Hamashmiya koyle b'tefillah, if a person makes his voice heard in davening, harezim ekatni amana, he indicates that he has little faith. This is only true if a person is able to have the same level of kavana, and therefore you should dafkas daven shmona esrei silently. But if you're having a hard time concentrating, and davening aloud, davening bekoil is ma'oirer kavana, then mutter, then you may daven loud. However, when may you daven loud? Only be yachid, because you're not disturbing other people. You want to have greater kavana, you can daven louder. Avol betzibur, also lemitrat tzibura, not to disturb your neighbor, even though you will have a harder time having kavana, doesn't give you the right to disturb the kavana of your neighbor. Rab Abba hava kamishtamit minei Rav Yehuda. Rab Abba was avoiding Rav Yehuda. Why was he avoiding Rav Yehuda? Because the Hava Kaboy Lamesek La'ad Yisrael, because Rav Abba wanted to do the mitzvah of Yishuv Eretz Yisrael. And he knew that Rav Yehuda was against it. The Amar Rav Yehuda, Kol ha'olam miBavel Eretz Yisrael, whoever goes from Bavel back to Eretz Yisrael before the coming of Mashiach violates a positive commandment, Shenemar, that Bavela Yuva'u, that they shall be brought into Bavel, and V'shamayu, and they should remain there Ad Yoim Prakti Yoisam, until the day that I will redeem them, says God. And this doesn't only refer to Bavel, but according to Rav Yehuda, this refers to a Jew in Golus. Okay, so and he's going to make Yishuv Eretz Yisrael, or as they call it today, he's going to make Aliyah. But he doesn't want Rav Yehuda to see him, but he wants to learn. So what did he do? Omar, he says, Eza, let me go. The Eshma, I'm going to go to the house and where he gathers, and to his Beis HaMedrash, and I'm going to stand outside. Let me chap some learning, and then Vahadal Apik, and then I'll go. Also, he went Ashkechei, and he found not Rav Yehuda learning directly, but he saw that Tanach teacher, those Amiroim that had Gavaldic memories, that would chazard all of the Braises by heart in front of Rav Yehuda to make sure they're saying it correctly. So he heard a Tanach, the Ktani Kamed Rav Yehuda, and he taught the following Braisa, that Hoya Oimed Bat Tefilla, if a person was davening, Vinis Ateish, and he passed wind, then then he has to wait until the bad odor goes away, and then and then he continues davening. Now, Amri, there's another version of this Braisa. Not it happened. He has a need to pass wind. We learned above that it's not nice, especially if it makes a sound, but he has to pass a wind. So marchik la'achayrav, or la'acharav daladamas, he should step back 4 amas, umis ateish, and pass wind, umamtin, and he should wait until the odor goes away, and v'chayzir mispalel, and he should continue to daven. And before he goes back to take up the Shemona Esrei, he should say the following bracha. He should say the following statement: Yitzar Tanu, you formed us. Nekavim, with openings and openings. Chalulim, with crevices and crevices. It's revealed and known to you, our shame, and our humiliation, even when we are living. And what will be our end? Worms and maggots. In other words, we admit that, but God, you made us this way. And then you take the steps back, you walk forwards to where you were, and you continue your Shemona Esrei. So Amar Lei, Rabbi Abba told the Tana teacher that it would have been enough just to hear this. And again, what's the Gevaldikite about this statement? The desire of living in Eretz Yisrael versus Shitas Rav Yehuda to live in Golus. Certain Yidden, they want to live only in a holy place. And let's go to learning Torah. They want to learn the holy Torah. Then you have parts of Torah that deal, all the Torah is holy, but these dinim that deal with these bodily needs that are not so pleasant. So Rav Yehuda l'shitase, Rav Yehuda learned every part of Torah. In other words, to bring the kedusha of Torah even to the lower levels of reality. When you live in Eretz Yisrael, you bring holiness into the holier part of the world. When you live in Bavel, when you live in Chutz La'aretz, in Machda Eretz Yisrael, you're bringing the light of Torah into a lower part of the world. So he heard in the Beis Medrash of Rabbi Yehuda Torah about the lower functions of man. Let's word it this way. Tana Rabbanan. We learned in a Braisa, if a person is sleeping, again they used to sleep naked, and a person didn't have a blanket, so the person is using his talis, his cloak, his jalaba, right? His Moroccan robe was his cover. And it's too cold to get out of bed. Time to say the Shema. And here the issue is, again, you may not say the Shema if your eyes can see your erva. So just make sure that your talis is secured under your neck. In other words, that affords a mechitza from your eyes to your erva, v'koida kriya Shema. In other words, even though the heart is not separated from the erva, the eyes are separated from the erva. No, that you have to make sure, you have to make sure that in between the heart, the chest, and the erva, that is where the talis is affixed strongly. V'tanakama hare liboy roya es ha'erva, and how does he only allow you just to make sure that your eyes don't see a erva? What about liboy roya es ha'erva? So the Gemara says, and there's a machlokes. Kosavar liboy roya es ha'erva muter. And again, these are very beautiful Hasidic themes. We had the whole beginning of Tanya. No, it's your eyes, your head. That God demands of all of us that we should think about godliness. We should be misboden about godliness. That's for sure. The erva represents the yetzer hara, the lower part of person. Question is, what about the heart? What about the midos? So certain people have taka the koyach that when they do the hisboinonus, they elevate their heart. Their heart is separated from the erva. Certain people don't have that yecholos. So that's the question. At least your eye should be off the erva. If your head is in the right place, that is keilu. The Alter Rebbe writes in Tanya, Hakadosh Baruch Hu mitzaref alamais, that your intellectual appreciation of godliness will be strong enough to motivate you to do the action, even though your heart is still seeing your erva. Your heart is not yet refined. Okay. Ulay. Amar Rafuna, Amar Rabbi Yochanan. If a person is walking through filthy alleys, you're walking through areas where there's a terrible odor, and you may not, as we're learning, you may not recite Torah or Tefilla in a place where there's a terrible odor. But here again, it's this man kriyashma. You're walking, you're not standing there. So it says that Rabbi Yochanan, a leniency, maniach yodei al piv. All you need to do is use your hand and cover your mouth, and then v'koyde kriyashma, recite the Shema. So says Rabbi Yochanan. So says Rav Huna in the name of Rabbi Yochanan. Now Rav Chizda heard it from Rav Huna. They were always they're the Baal Abai and Rava, Rav Huna and Rav Chizda. So Rav Chizda tells Rav Huna, Ho'el came by God. Even im Amr Ali Rabbi Yochanan bepume, even if I would have heard this directly from Rabbi Yochanan, I would not listen to him. Because how can you say the Shema by simply covering your mouth? As we'll see, that he was a lot more machmer Rav Chizda. You have to stop. You may not say the Shema until you walk away from that area. Ikadamri, there's another version. Amar Rabba bar bar Chana, in the name of Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi, same din, like Rabbi Yochanan, and there is terrible odor, but you're walking. It suffices for you to cover your mouth with your hand. You can read the Shema. Here Rav Chizda also, here in this version, he told Rabba bar bar Chana, who elikim by God, even if im Amr li Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi bepume, so machlokes Rav Huna, let's go to the first version, and Rav Chizda. Fragt die Gemara, mi Amar Rav Huna, hachi, was he lenient? He sided with Rabbi Yochanan. Amar Rav Huna, Talmud Chacham asur lo la'amid b'makam ha'tinofis. A Talmud Chacham may not even stop in a place of tinofis, even though he's not saying anything, he's just standing there. Lefishi efshel lo la'amid b'leihir Torah. A Talmud Chacham, the definition is a yid whose mind is in Torah. So if Rav Huna holds that you may not even think words of Torah b'makom ha'tinofis, how can he say that you can recite it? Who cares if you're covering your mouth? Says the Gemara, no. Like Kasha, Khan, the Isur of Rav Huna was when you're stopping. If you're stationary, then even thinking is usher. So therefore, don't be stationary there. Khan, when was he matir? The mahalach, when you're walking. Now, Amar Rabbi Yochanan was Rabbi Yochanan that's lenient. For Amar Rabba bar bar Chana, Amar Rabbi Yochanan, b'chol makom mutar l'hara b'divrei Torah chutz b'beis hamerchetz, in a bathhouse, when beis hakisei in a bathroom, avade. So that's a makom ha'tinofis, is a bathroom. So if you may not even be maharer, again, if you can't even think about the words of Torah, how can you say the words of Torah even though you're covering your mouth? And v'chitema achinami, kam ba'omed, that's when it's also when you're stationary. And kam b'mahalach, nah, eini, because Rabbi Abohu havaka azal basrei Rabbi Yochanan, and v'havaka kara kriya Shema. Rabbi Abohu was reading the Shema, the story. They walked through a dirty alleyway, a dirty street. There was filth on the streets. So then what happened here is Ishtek, Rabbi Abba stopped saying the Shema, and then he had a kasha, and he wanted to know from where does he start saying the Shema again? Does he have to go back to the beginning? Can he just continue from where he left off? And being that he was walking behind Rabbi Yochanan, he asked that kasha to Rabbi Yochanan, and parenthetically, people ask, he asked a shaila to Rabbi Yechanan in the middle of the Shema, but that's what happened over here. From where should I go back? To which Rabbi Yechanan told him this differentiation that we just had above. A few daf ago, that if the pause was so long that you could have finished the Shema yourself during that pause, then and if not, you just continue from where you left off. From the fact that Rabbi Yechanan responded to Rabbi Abba is mashma that he agreed with the fact that he stopped. Because if Rabbi Yechanan would have disagreed, he would have told him, Machal, why did you stop? So the Gemara says, no. He disagreed with his stopping. This is taka what Rabbi Yechanan told him. According to me, you should not have stopped. You should have covered your mouth and kept on walking. But obviously, when I heard you stop, I knew that you don't hold. This is a topic which is up to our machlokes. So you stop. So your question is, according to you, then chayzer l'rosh. Gewaltig. Says the Gemara, Tanya Kavasi de Rafuna, that was more lenient, if you cover your mouth, and Tanya Kavasi de Rabchizda, that asers, you may not cover, it's not a solution. You have to walk away from that area. Tanya Kavasi de Rafuna, according to Braisa, Mahalach b'mavoyis hamitunafis. Maniach yod yal pivi yikra kriyishma, clearly, like Rafuna, Tanya Kavasi de Rabchizda, hoy mahalach b'mavoyis hamitunafis, lo yikra kriyishma, v'lo yoid, if you are already in the middle, you gotta stop. And now the Gemara says, according to this latter Braisa, according to Rab Chizda also, what happens if you did not? Amar Rav Miyasha bar bereid Rabbi Shua ben Levi. And Rabbi Shua ben Levi, according to one version, is the lenient one, but his Einakol said how terrible it is. Olav hakasu v'omer. V'gam ani nosati lehem chukim lo yitoivim. That I gave him chukim that they made into lo yitoivim. Mishpatim lo yichya b'hem, that they did not properly live with them. Saying the Shema is the biggest mitzvah. It's our life. But saying it b'makim ha'mentunafais makes it into something not good. Rav Asi Yomar, that he gave another pasuk, it says, Hoi, woe, moishchei ha'ovin, those who pull sin upon themselves, b'chavlei hashav, with cords of falsehood. So Rashi says that, in other words, this is a sin of speech. Speech is a weak. You can say it's not a ma'aseh, it's only a dibur. But still, it brings sin upon a person. And what was the sin? He's saying Shema, he said about Makamatinofis. When it says in a pasuk now in Chumash, a pasuk in Shlach, Kidvar Hashem Baza, that he scorned the words of Hashem, is referring to saying the Shema b'Makamatinofis. And now in the reverse, in the positive, in Pasak Mascharoi, Amar Ababohu, Olav, Hakasav Oimer, that Ubadovar Hazeh, Ta'arichu Yamim, this will mamish bring you long life. This is a pasuk towards the end of Hazinu. Keloi Davaroi Kumikem, I'm quoting the pasuk in Hazinu, Kihu Chayechem, Ubadovar Hazeh, Ta'arichu Yamim. So what's Ubadovar Hazeh? Ubadovar Hazeh is, Bishvil, says Rashi, Bishvil Dibur Zeh. That not that what you spoke, that you did not speak. That just like there's a mitzvah to speak, right? Not, sometimes the mitzvah is to abstain and not to talk. And that brings a person long life. It's interesting. Why will this bring a person long life? Tarichun Yamim. Now we did learn punkt an daf ches, that Rabbi Yechanan was wondering how can there be older people in Babel out of Israel that have a long life, and they told him because they wake up early in the Beis HaKnesses, they stay there late. The Beis HaKnesses is considered part of Eretz Yisrael, no matter where Beis HaMedrash, no matter where you live. So if based on the restrictions of not being allowed, even when you're walking, to say the Shema, even when you cover your mouth, if it's b'makam ha'tinoifis, l'chura, all of this will lend a person to be more in the Beis HaMedrash. So you're going to spend more time in the shul. So you're going to have arichus yamim. Chavre, let's chaparain one more piece. If a person had his talis girded on him, but only on his waist, and his body was covered waist down, his upper torso is uncovered. Says Rav Huna, mutar likrais kriya shema. The problem of Shema is only to make sure that the lave and the erva are separated. But as long as you have that separation, and that's a side of the hikoin lekras alekacha Yisrael, which is also meaning that begashmius put on a garment that's designated for tefillah. And being that we find by the Big Day Kahuna that a gartel is considered a beged, so it's also practical that you can have a gartel designated for tefillah. Then there's al pi kabbalah, al pi soid, many inyanim that we separate during davening. At least iskafia, there's a lower person, even if a person is not a tzaddik, but at least to separate the higher person from the lower person, that's a gartel. And al pi halacha, the concept of at least making sure that there is something that stops, especially when you wore a robe. If you're not going to put on a gartel, right? If you're not going to gird yourself, then your lave will see your erva. And that may not happen. But as long as the lave doesn't see the erva, even if the upper body is uncovered, you can say the Shema. And not only is this Rafuna, but Tanyana mihachi hoisat alisa, you shall beged, whether it's made out of a cloth, whether it's made out of leather, whether it's made out of a sackcloth, as long as it is chagura al masnav, it's girded on his hips, so his body is covered from the waist down. Mutar likreis kriya shema. However, daf chaf hey avol letfila achi yachasas libay. There, your upper body has to be covered as well. So Rashi says avol letfila, the top Rashi in the Amid tzaruchu laharis etz atzma. You have to make it clear that you're standing in front of a king. You have to show yourself. You have to externally behave, which will be moishech, your kavana and your feeling that you're standing in front of a king. The lamid be'ema, in front of a king, we stand with awe. Avol kriya shema, says Rashi, ein bedabel lifnei hamelech. Shema is a statement that you're making. You're not speaking in front of the king. That's why al pi nigla, there's more leniencies as far as tznius is concerned regarding the Shema. L'chayda, a little bit deeper, that another layer. Shema, fakir, the whole avoid of Shema is avanira. In other words, your heart has to be revealed. We shuckle when we daven. Kol atzmai temarna. We daven Shemona Esrei. We learned in this daf. You have to daven daf kabalachash. The rest of davening we daven loud to be mo'edu de kavana. Your heart has to be aflame. That's Shema. Shema's ava. Shema's yira. Shemona Esrei is bitul. Fakert, when a person is standing bebitul, they daven balachash and there's less movement because they're ka'avda the kamimare, because they have to have that experience of them being batul. And therefore, all of my experiences should not be experienced. The only thing that I have to know is that I'm standing in front of the king. God willing, to be continued.